Chapter 2, A Mad Story. I hope it's not going to be the same old stuff about how it all began with Jithin Nedumala. The story of Mad is much bigger than that. This was Jithin's response when I told him that I was going to pen the story of Mad. A typical article about Mad goes something like this. Jithin Nedumala was on a train home to Kochi from Mumbai. It is quite a long journey and he was tired. He made these trips to different cities in India frequently. He traveled for at least 200 days a year and he wondered how he was going to keep up with the pace of growth of Mad. He had just received 2 more requests to set up branches of Mad. While this was exciting, as CEO, he was seriously concerned about the ability of organization to maintain its passion for its work and to continue to provide the high quality of service to some of the most needy children in the country. Jithin reflected on the achievements and growth of Mad. This was a global case study on Mad, and as usual, it began with Jithin. But that wasn't really the beginning, at least where Jithin is concerned. According to Jithin, not the beginning of Mad either. Mad had 5 initiators, all of them equally involved in conceiving Make a Difference, and all of them equally committed to bringing that idea to life. In the upward struggle that the first year was, they worked together to raise funds, to recruit volunteers, and to build up the organization. In time, they would all remain associated with Mad in various capacities. Fundraising, beginning new chapters in other cities. But after the first year, only Jithin would continue to be completely and exclusively devoted to Mad. And Kochi would be the first city where the organization was able to establish its presence in an effective manner. So it is that the origin of Mad is synonymous with Kochi and Jithin Nedumala. While Mad has been influenced and shaped by several hands since its inception, even today, 8 years down the line, the overall Mad culture, especially in Kochi, strongly reflects Jithin's own deeply held beliefs. So, to understand what keeps the wheels turning in Mad, it would probably be necessary to understand what makes Jithin tick. The 2 traits that mark out Jithin very strongly are his deep sense of empathy and his anarchist streak. Perhaps anarchist is too strong a word. What Jithin does have is an irrepressible, rebellious nature that almost always leads him to challenge the status quo. While these traits are perfectly in sync with the culture of Mad, the journey that led him here has been a long and arduous one, weaving through peer scrutiny, parental disappointment, and principals, officers. Rewind to Jithin's school days at Kendriya Vidyalaya, where it was all smooth sailing till grade 5. And then life suddenly got exciting. Jitin entered grade 6 with an attitude which got him into regular trouble with teachers. Being hauled off to the principal's office soon became a routine matter. It's difficult to say why the trouble started around that time, says Jitin. From a very young age, I found it really difficult to put up my heart into things I thought were meaningless. I remember rattling the cage often enough in younger classes, but I also remember that I was open to being fobbed off with some excuse when I was younger. As I grew older, I found it increasingly difficult to study stuff that seemed irrelevant. I particularly remember the struggle I had drawing the tools used by Paleolithic man. Seriously? Stone Age tools? Can you think of an occasion when that information might come in handy? Very persuasive arguments, but his teachers were not impressed. Whether it was a change that had been in the making or a radical transformation, the end result was that within a couple of months, he had become so notorious that parents often tried to keep their wards away from his corrupting influence. The teacher, as an all-powerful figure of classroom authority, bothered him. Since he was already in their bad books, challenging their authority was almost a reflexive impulse for him. He saw no wrong in letting the teacher know the truth as he saw it. After all, there were few things more amusing than tossing in a stone and watching a splash it made and ripples it created. Accordingly, the math teacher had to be made aware of the unanimous class opinion that her classes were incompressible and ineffective. Whereupon the entire class unanimously dissociated themselves from Jitin's pronouncement, and he almost earned himself another visit to the principal's office. But since the teacher did not want the principal or anyone else to know what had transpired in the class, he was instead given an individual desk next to her as punishment. Just the kind of action that stumped Jitin. There is genuine wonder in his voice as he says, apparently, she had self-awareness enough to know that mere proximity to her was adequate punishment, but not enough to know that she was an incompetent teacher. The rest of his academic life at Kendriya Vidyalaya School followed a similar pattern because Jitin really had very little motivation to reform his classroom behavior. His antics provided him with infinite amusement and respite from the monotony of school routine. Also, since he had always been academically competent, the school administration always stopped short of inflicting any punishment that was truly painful. These were usually reserved for academic failures. But the most important reason why he reveled in his bad boy image was that It increased his popularity with the girls. This, in the end, made it all worthwhile and caused him to carry on the merry mayhem till the end of his school days. As befitted his newfound status of a troublemaker, Jitin was increasingly becoming a backbencher, a development that the teachers rarely took an objection to. It meant that he was out of their sight, out of their hair, and the classes went on smoothly. As for Jitin, backbenchers allowed him to keep himself occupied even in the most boring of classes. A win-win situation, and one of the few occasions in higher classes when Jitin and the teachers were on the same side. The backbenchers were where he found the most fun people at school. For the school administration, these were the academic outcasts, the students with low marks, poor language skills, and little motivation to study. For the students, they were social outcasts, rough, average, very uncool types. In common parlance, they were the gundas of the school, and stories of their wild exploits were always passed along the student grapevine. While they were shunned by most of his classmates, Jitin found that being with them definitely made the time at school pass quicker. That in itself was motivation enough for him to begin hanging out with them. They bunked classes to play football, experimented with smoking, and scared off classmates who might carry back tales of their misdemeanors. Jitin shrugs. Not exactly things to be proud of, but well, nobody really got hurt. Being an insider meant that Jitin gained unexpected insights into the lives of his friends. He discovered that all of them came from underprivileged backgrounds. Some of them came from single parent families. Some had parents who were at the bottom of the food chain in the government job hierarchy. In technical parlance, they were class 4 employees, manual workers. In short, every single one of them came from a very non-affluent background. He also noticed the subtle forms of discrimination they were often subjected to, and the general assumption that they would never amount to much. He had never given heed to these biases before, nor thought of them as unfair. But now that the victims had a name, empathy was easy to come by. He could see how the cloud of negativity around them could take a toll on their self-esteem, making failure a self-fulfilling prophecy. The other thing that he discovered about them was that they made for fabulous friends. For all their outward toughness, they valued relationships and placed a high premium on friendships. In school and out of it, they were always in his corner, always backing him under every circumstance. Their loyalty was unflinching and unconditional. They never ever backed away when he was in trouble, irrespective of the consequences. Within the security of this fellowship, Jitin had the time of his life. His most vivid memories of those times is a rather silly but amusing incident from grade 10. It was a hot summer afternoon, and the class was interminably long and boring. Enter a bottle of Vicks and a question. What can happen if the contents come into contact with human eye? The experiment ended in tears. Jitin and his gang were hauled up to the front of the class, but try as they might, they could neither open their burning eyes nor stop the free-flowing waterworks. The class cracked up at the sight of oversized guys rubbing their eyes and weeping uncontrollably. A peeved teacher and asinine gag, no thought to consequences. It's probably a tableau of my school days at Kendra Vidyalaya. And maybe that's why the image is stuck in my head. Through all this drama, his academic life continued to chug along smoothly. Jitin chose commerce as the preferred course, and after completing grade 12, he joined Sacred Heart College at Kochi to do his graduation. Except for the venue, life remained pretty much the same. Academics continued to be drudgery, and cutting classes and provoking authorities continued to be the primary mode of escaping the monotony of college routine. But there were creative highs as well. Along with close friends, Jitin organized a college fest that he swears was the best the college had ever seen. It was colorful, noisy, and boisterous, and a smash hit with the students. For the very same reasons, it did not go down too well with the college administration. A few months down the line, when cracks appeared on the pillars of the college hall, the loud music at the fest was held responsible for the damage, says Jitin. But those were not completely wasted years either, and Jitin learned a lot in those 3 years at college, even if most of the learning happened to be the outside the classroom and off the campus. There were the regular road trips, which to the Jitin seemed more fruitful than attending classes. He worked with a manpower consulting firm which offered part-time employment to college students for events in and around Kochi. But he learned plenty of invaluable business lessons on the ground. Importance of setting up systems, maintaining records, and following up with people to ensure that commitments were fulfilled. Plus, he made enough money to afford a touchscreen phone. It would be boorish to dwell on the money, but let's just say touchscreens were not cheap way back in 2003, he says. Talking about the money aspect makes me cringe, but it was a turning point in my life. For me, the big takeaway from this phase of my life was that I had earned all the money an 18-year-old could ask for, but at the end of it, realized that money hardly mattered. It was boring and to some extent too easy. The whole get rich or die trying philosophy that was so prevalent among us MBA aspirants lost its shine, and the need to make money and prove myself to the world was lost. Jitin labels those years of his life as the rebel without a cause phase. I was whiling away my time while waiting for the next phase of my life to begin, the corporate phase. Really, what was there to think about? Like everyone else, I was cruising along a pre-programmed path. Education, job, money, marriage. It was understood that my next stop would be an MBA, and I even gave a couple of interviews for the MBA course after graduation. Even as late as 2005, an NGO for children was not on Jitin's agenda. Of course, I cared, and of course, I was affected by the plight of the underprivileged, but no more than the next person. And to be perfectly honest, I never took it any further, nor did I have any concrete plans to do so in the immediate future. But towards the close of the year, he was jolted out of his comfort zone by two life-changing incidents. His outlook on life and consequently the course of his life were to change forever. In November 2005, a close friend died in an accident while they were at a picnic. The close encounter with death was a punch in the gut. Like most teenagers, for Jitin too, death was something that was likely to happen someday. And that someday was in the distant enough future to be unreal. It was not something that needed to be confronted or accounted for in the equation of life. But faced with death, Jitin was forced to acknowledge the fragility of life and reassess the preciousness of time. Things he wanted to do in life took on a sudden urgency. Here and now became supremely important. In December 2005, Jitin's friend Sujit Boki got admission into the prestigious college Symbiosis, Pune. Before he left, they went to the YMCA shelter home to distribute sweets to children there. It was their earliest brush with institutionalized children and the first opportunity they had ever had to understand why they were so tagged. They realized that the children at YMCA were not orphans. They were the children of the state. The government had undertaken their upkeep either because their families were unable to shoulder their responsibility due to economic reasons, or they were at risk in their own homes, which were deemed unsafe for them. Worky and Jitin ended up spending a lot of time chatting and playing with them. Turned out that the kids did not conform to the popular image of victims. They were cheeky and spunky and lots of fun. Before leaving, they asked the kids what they wanted at their next visit. They expected the children to ask for more sweets, but to their surprise, the children asked for books. So, Woki and Jitin put together a collection of books, and a couple of days later, Jitin returned to YMCA with the books. He told the children that he would bring more books only when they had finished reading them all. A week later, the children handed him a bunch of book reviews to prove to him that they had read all the books. Jitin was stunned. The children had managed to confound him yet again. He realized how little he really knew them and how much he had relied on popular stereotypes to box and label them. Thus began Jitin's first serious attempt at social change. He started the Royal Library at the YMCA. If royal was an exaggerated flourish, library was even more so. The entire project consisted of a record-keeping ledger and a dozen books, begged or borrowed from friends and family. His visits to YMCA became more frequent, and so did the amount of time he spent with the children. Physically, they were separated from his world by a few kilometers, but for all practical purposes, they might as well have been in a parallel universe. Many of the children had faced abuse in their homes or on the streets. All of them had distressing stories of families torn apart by violence or financial distress. Jitin found it difficult to comprehend their stubborn cheerfulness amidst the instability and inadequacy that was their lives. Neither could he understand how they had managed such equanimity in the shadow of their poignant past and an uncertain future. He was faced with a different reality, one he had never known could exist. It filled him with a disquiet that he could not shake off. Nevertheless, those were the happiest days of his life. He basked in the warm glow of the children's respect. For the children's time in his life, he was being looked up to, and he desperately wanted to live up to those expectations. It was also beginning to dawn on him that these children had immense potential. All they lacked was opportunity. So, along with the library project, he began motivational sessions to inspire the children and to encourage them to dream big. One of their favorite books was Wings of Fire by Dr. APJ Abdul Kalam, and they spent many evenings passionately discussing it. Each time he went to YMCA, he was struck by how intelligent, mature, and talented these children were. He wanted them to study further and build a bright future. He also wanted them out of the center and moved someplace better. It wrangled that the center authorities treated the children with scant respect. It was obvious to him that they did not expect the children to amount to much. It infuriated It infuriated him that people thought nothing of bringing leftovers to the YMCA. Food and clothing that they would not dream of giving to their neighbors or guests was all right for these poor orphan children. People came visiting in expensive luxury cars but gave small change for the upkeep of YMCA. Never spending real money to transform the lives of the children. The children, however, always shrugged off any unpleasantness, never dwelling on it for long. Upon receiving a minuscule amount of food from someone, one child joked, "At least they did not finish off the chili chicken this time." Their dark humor only fueled Jitin's darker thoughts. The idea that the adults had messed up was gathering force with each passing day, as was his anger with the entire system for the way in which it dealt with these children. It was clear that the system was built in a way that made it almost impossible for them to succeed. In fact, it was lauded in a way that made failure a certainty. Meanwhile, he was under severe pressure from his college for poor attendance and insubordination in the classroom. In addition, he was facing problems on the home front. His parents were agitated about the negative feedback from the college and the intensity of his involvement with YMCA. None of this really thwarted his intentions. By now, he was finding it increasingly difficult to accept the well-worn excuses trotted out by adults to justify terrible social disparities he saw all around. It was a situation that, to him, screamed for urgent and immediate action. The remedy he was prescribed for his angst was simple: a pair of blinders. He was advised to forget about it and get on with his life and to get into social service. When he had retired and had settled his own children, it was pretty surreal, says Jitin with a weary smile. The way to handle a social emergency was to shelve it for another 50 years. The blow that finally felled his dream came from an unexpected quarter. One day, when he went to YMCA, one of the children, Vivek, was missing. Vivek was kick-ass awesome, and Jitin had always thought of him as the alpha kid of YMCA. He had high hopes for all the kids at YMCA, but his hopes had always shone brightest for Vivek. Vivek's guardians, however, had other plans for him. So far, he had been schooled in Malayalam, and since all education from grade 10 onwards was in English, it was decided that he would not be able to cope with the higher studies. Consequently, as soon as he completed grade 10, he was shipped off to Mumbai to work at a small factory. Jitin was inconsolable. What made it worse was that the realization that nobody except him had really believed in the dreams he had built up. Not even the children themselves. They had seen through the fantasy he had spun around them. Well, aware that there was no real value in continuing to study in a system that was loaded against them. None of the children were shocked when Vivek was taken away to Mumbai because that was the reality that they had long accepted. A low-paying menial job or life on the streets. Looking back at all the reading sessions of Wings of Fire made Jitin feel like a complete ass for leading them up the garden path. When he had finished with the despondency, his anger came rushing back. He was furious at everyone and everything that had stolen the future from these children. He was angry at the government, the system, the society, everyone who had either perpetuated this injustice or not done enough to prevent it. If learning English was the key to higher studies and a better future, he would work out a way to secure it for them. It was naive to assume that English was a one-point problem or a one-point solution to a problem. With time and increased clarity about the complexity of the problem, the organization would evolve to meet these challenges. But MAD originated with a single point agenda: to develop fluency in written and spoken English for institutionalized children. MAD believed that doing so would open up new avenues for these children and bridge the inequality that exists in education and beyond. At that point, 4 of his friends came on board, backing him all the way, and from then on, he was never alone. Phone calls were made, and in May 2006, MAD Kochi was established with 30 volunteers. They took up 4 shelter homes in Kochi and began teaching the children English for 4 hours every week. The 4 MAD centers were Sneha Children's Home and YMC, Shelter Homes for Boys, Maria Children's Home, and St. Teresa's Shelter Homes for Girls. The resistance to MAD came from many quarters, some expected, many unexpected. Behind the successful launch of MAD were many unhappy parents who felt that their children would do better to focus on studies rather than wasting time volunteering. Due to parental pressure, volunteers often dropped out, leading to chronic volunteer shortage. In several instances, the center administrations did not see eye to eye with MAD volunteers, and that blunted the efforts of the volunteers to a large extent. And money was always a problem. They never seemed to have enough to carry out all the activities they wanted to. For a long time to come, their best efforts were barely enough to hold their heads above water on the financial front. But nothing dampened the MAD spirit. They would cross the obstacles and do what needed to be done. They were not afraid of the long haul. They were here to stay. Matt changed Jitin's life more drastically than he had expected. For a while, he carried on gamely pouring his money and energy into Matt while his parents pushed for an MBA. His boss pushed for greater focus on job and his girlfriend pushed for more commitment. Finally, hemmed in from all sides, Jitin pulled away from it all and moved to Bangalore, where the head office of MAD is currently situated. It was a difficult call to make, but Jitin has no regrets. Finally, his life was only MAD, and he has found peace with that. Happiness for him is working for a bigger cause than just his own well-being. It also helps that I am commitment phobic. He quips, only half jokingly. Jitin believes that his generation is different for all the right reasons. He also argues vehemently against the stereotyping of today's youth as the me generation. Our generation is often accused of being selfish and self-centered. But truth be told, it is learned behavior. From early childhood, our life is nothing but a race where we are under constant pressure to outperform our peers. And in adulthood, our success is defined singularly by our financial standing and the number of zeros in our salary. I am neither cribbing nor making judgments, but the fact remains that young people are rarely encouraged to be a part of social change by the adults in their lives. The message is loud and clear. Put yourself first. Take care of your own interests. As for others, look away and walk away. What I do find heartening is that despite all these disincentives, so many youngsters still believe so passionately in making a difference. The jobbish factor. Incidentally, the keeper of the Royal Library at YMCA was a quiet, serious boy, Jobbish Matthew. His job was to keep the books safe, the best that he could, and write the details of books borrowed in the register. 6 years later, Jobbish would reconnect with Matt, undergo tutelage, go abroad for higher studies, and become a student celebrity of sorts at MAD. And then finally, join MAD as a volunteer. So, although Jitin looked at his stint with the YMCA library project as a no-show, his actions did have a payoff, and the karmic cycle did come full circle, even if that became evident only much later.